All right, so we are going to keep this interactive. What do you think is project-based learning? Anybody? What is project-based learning? Why are we here? Yeah? Learning through small projects. Okay? Anyone want to detail that? Yeah?
Give a problem to a student or group of students, and they should try to solve the problem in their own way.
Okay.
And through in that process of achieving the goal or solving the problem, they will learn something. That is what I can say that project-based problem.
Okay. So let's, do we have a marker here? Yes. So what are the goals for a project-based learning? Can we use some terms here? What are the goals of a project-based learning? Yes.
If some creativity is associated with learning, learning would become more effective.
Okay.
So that is why project-based learning, it enforces towards creativity along learning.
Good. So, project-based learning is like this elephant, right? I mean, somebody can say elephant looks like this thick, whatever, right? There are different descriptions of it and all of them are right. Okay, so there is nothing like a wrong answer in this particular case. And therefore, I also want, most of the questions I'm going to ask will have no wrong answers. That's how I am, right? So what are the goals of a project-based learning? So we have heard what are the advantages of project-based learning. So if I want to give a project in a course, right, what is the goal that I'm expecting? Huh?
To generate innovative ideas.
To generate innovative ideas. Let me just write all these things down here. Generate innovative ideas. All right. Improve knowledge of the subject, or if I can just write briefly, learn the discipline. Yeah? Group activity, okay. Anything else? Learning by doing. So learning is the goal. It's not, see, by doing is just we do this, so the goal is learning, right? So we have already said learn discipline. Any other kind of learning? Group activity is also, we can say, this is essentially towards teamwork. So you learn about teamwork. Everything that we do in a college, we must eventually learn something out of it.
Measuring the learning outcomes.
Pardon?
Measuring the learning outcomes.
I didn't get you. Sorry, what learning outcomes?
Learning outcomes. Measuring the learning outcomes.
Measuring learning outcomes. That's for the teacher to do, right?
Whether the outcomes were achieved or not.
No, that's an examination part. How do we verify that somebody has done something right or wrong, right? But what is the learning outcome? Is there any other learning outcome that you see here, other than learning some things about discipline and learning about teamwork? What are the other learnings that happen? Yes, please.
Learning through experience.
True, but that's still learning, right? I'm saying learning what?
Doing some project. During the project, if you are doing certain things,
Yeah.
that inculcates into knowledge, and you are learning many more things. Rather than if you are hearing the subject and if you are doing it yourself, that makes the difference, whole difference.
No, what you are saying is we do project-based learning because we learn better, we learn more. But I'm saying that here the question is, what is it that you are learning? So learning discipline, for example, through lectures you will learn some part of the discipline. Through projects you will learn probably more of that discipline, right? Is there any other learning that is taking place? More related areas. Okay, let me write that down as well. Learn related areas. Learn time management. Okay. Well, peer learning is just a method, right? You are not learning to peer learn. Let us completely hear him out. Yes, so teamwork is learning, like how to work in a team. is being learned, that I already said, right? But peer learning is a methodology. It's not the endpoint, or it's not the learning itself.
Learning by doing some activity, learning by doing some dialogues.
That's the definition of project learning, right? So we said, what is project learning? You can say all those things. But at the end of project learning, why are we doing project learning? Because there are learning goals, right? What are those learning goals is what we are listing down here.
Also, they are going to learn how to behave in a team.
That's already said here. Teamwork is one of the things that they will learn. Use applications of the material that we have learned.
So to come up with some end product,
Yeah.
to come up with some end product which might be of help to the community and society.
Coming up with end products.
End product.
Right. Okay, so I will roughly keep it here, generate innovative ideas, maybe build technologies.
So persistence and perseverance while solving some problems.
Okay, all right, all sorts of good things. Right, since the board is kind of full, we'll stop here. And so, yeah.
Win-win situation.
Pardon?
Win and win
Win
situation.
at win situation.
Win and win situation.
Win and win situation. So how do you learn win and win situation? Again, this is a situation that is getting created, right?
The fact is that if a group consists of 10 persons,
Yeah.
and there is a heterogeneity in the group, all of them are not of the similar IQ nature.
Right.
Then in that case, if one person is extraordinary, he is doing the effort, and he is asking his colleagues to make help, so that even the person having the minimum IQ among them, he also learns something new. So he tries to achieve something, and with that, each individual also wins something. So
Right.
that is a win and win situation.
No, so what you're saying is absolutely right. That as a group we learn more than what we could have learned as an individual. The question here was, what is it that we are learning, right? It's not the process of learning. It is not that it is better than lectures. It's at the end of the day, there has to be learning outcomes for whatever we are doing. So what are those learning outcomes? And in that sense, we are saying the learning of the subject, or learning of related subjects, or learning of interdisciplinary things, or application of those things. Those are the things that we are going to learn through projects. Okay. Now, one of the things that I learned at Olin is, when we talk about project-based learning, people will come up with a long list of ideas. This is what the project should make us learn. And this list is usually so long that we then forget about it, right? And we don't really follow it up when we design, what kind of projects we are going to give, how we are going to conduct those projects, how we're going to evaluate those projects, how we're going to mentor those projects. All that is forgotten, right? So therefore, the first thing in project-based learning is we must have the learning outcomes very clearly defined. And learning outcomes, as I said, typically get defined by union of everything. That's the wrong approach, okay? Learning outcome of a first year project is going to be very different from the learning outcome of a final year project, okay? Learning outcomes will depend on what material you want to cover. And like in a final year project, which is like a 1 year project, teamwork, and we are expecting synthesis of all kinds of information or learning that you have happened in the first 3 years. The learning outcomes are going to be very, very different from the learning outcome of a very first semester the student has just come into the university and is trying to learn something, right? So if you focus on learning outcomes, you will be able to better design your project. Right. Now, the second thing that we want to talk about is, we all have done project-based learning, I'm sure. We all have given projects in our classes, right? When do you give a project to a student? Typically, what happens is, in the beginning of the semester, I've just introduced the subject, I have maybe taken 2-3 lectures, so people know roughly what is what to expect in this particular course. And then I say, okay, at the end of this semester, I expect you to be able to do this. Okay. Now, and then typically what happens is, I will also say, hey, I'm very student friendly, right? And therefore, whenever you have a problem in your project, give me a call and we'll discuss that, right? And I promise to them that if they ask me for time on a weekday, within 24 hours, I will be available to them, irrespective, if I am on campus, of course, right? Now, guess what? Throughout the semester, no student ever has any problem in that project. Is that sound familiar? Right? So in January, I gave a project, okay, we are going to, so this is networking course, and I'm saying, hey, you guys have to build a network application, maybe a chat, maybe a peer-to-peer file sharing system or whatever, and in April, I'm going to take a demo. And you also will need to give a 15-minute presentation, there will be a poster session, you need to submit a report, all that stuff. Deadline is 15th April, right? And of course, I'm available, send me an email anytime, give me a call, my phone number is with everybody, and so on. And I never, ever receive a phone call or an email from any student, right? Until about, around 1st of April, I'll send a reminder, hey guys, only 2 weeks remaining. I hope all of you guys are doing fine because I have not heard from you, right? That is when they really remember that the project has to be done, okay? How do we solve this problem, right? Students are students. I mean, they will work with deadlines, right? And of course, after 1st of April, when I send this email, then they're all like, last 2 months I've been trying to solve this problem and I'm not able to do this. Can you extend the deadline by 1 week? Or can we do this after the end sem? Can we do, all that kind of stuff will start, right? How do we solve this problem? Yeah.
One thing that I had implemented, I have faced similar problem. So one midterm evaluation also I had studied. Again, same thing in the midterm happens, and then probably at least some of them get the trust to carry forward what they have done in the midterm.
All right, so a good suggestion from here is that we can have a midterm evaluation. If we say, hey, I'm going to look at what you have done around 1st of March and you better show me something, the hope is that on 1st of March they will show you something. So they would have done some work before that, and it's not everything is being done at the last minute, right? Any other ideas? Yeah.
Project into several modules. And each modules are being, say monitored after each and every interval of time. And I think that could be one of the way of monitoring it.
Yeah. So even better idea, instead of 1 midterm evaluation, we can have 5 midterm evaluations, right? So we can have project divided into 5 modules, and every module there will be some kind of interaction. So maybe every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, we have an interaction session. We are trying to find out what have you done and so on, right? And if we have kind of given these deadlines that this module should have been done within these 3 weeks, then hopefully students would do that, right? Now, the Olin experience that I had was very different from all this stuff that we are talking about, okay? What they will say is, you got to meet with students almost every day. It's not once in 3 weeks. It's not once in 8 weeks. Almost every day. They will meet alternate days typically, okay? That is the kind of investment a faculty member puts in with projects, okay? Completely unheard of in any Indian institution. I don't think I've heard of any faculty member in this country who, like BTech projects have been common across any university that you look at, right? Do we meet with our BTech students who are doing projects with us almost every day? Of course not. I mean, I haven't heard of any such person. But project-based learning, if you really want to do it, that's the kind of investment that is needed. Otherwise, what really is going to happen is, I mean, okay, if you do meet more frequently, things will happen better. There is no doubt about it, right? If that frequency is high enough, then things are very good. If that frequency is not so high enough, then you will see today Google gives you a lot of solutions. Particularly, I come from computer science, and most of the projects that I'm going to give are basically software-based. And software for almost anything under the sun is available. You do Google, something will come out. And just make a minor tinkering with that, maybe change the user interface so that even if I've seen this software before, I won't recognize it, and that's it, right? So the only way to ensure that the students do a project and a proper project is to say, I'm going to meet you often, right? So typically what happens in Olin framework is that there will be alternate days, 2-hour meeting with all the students put together in a class. Okay, so if we may have a class of 30, 40, 50 students, 60 students, they have been divided into groups of, let's say, 3 or 4. So you have 10, 12 groups. So in one large room, there are these 10, 12 tables with 3, 4, 5 chairs around it. And there will be 1 or 2 faculty members, couple of TAs. They are going around asking every group, what are you doing? Where are you stuck? What did you do since the last couple of days? And so on, right? So that is the kind of interaction that happens between the faculty, TAs, whatever, this administrative group, and the students. Okay? And faculty is not necessarily an expert in that area. Okay? But faculty knows that if you have a particular kind of problem, whom to approach. Who is the right faculty member in the institute? Which is the right kind of book to read? Which is the right kind of course that you can download and see, right? That is what faculty is for, as somebody who can help you. Faculty will not answer all the questions of the students because nobody can know all the answers. Okay? So you facilitate learning rather than giving learning, right? So first major difference between the projects that I am so used to here and what I saw at Olin was the amount of investment that the faculty makes in students' learning. Okay. Now, second major change, major difference that I noticed was, I'm going to use the term autonomy repeatedly today, and we are going to talk about different aspects of autonomy of running a course. One aspect of autonomy is how much control student has on learning, right? Can student decide the project, or am I going to decide the project? Do I say this is one project that everybody has to do, and we'll see different implementations of it? Right? So I may say, hey, this time I'm teaching computer networks course, peer-to-peer file sharing is the hot thing. Everybody implements some kind of peer-to-peer file sharing, right? Or do I say, you know what, any kind of network application is fine, but I want it to be such that it has reasonable complications, that you should be able to have not just 2 client and server, but you should be able to have a server and multiple clients or peer-to-peer, because these are slightly more complex things than just a single client server, right? It should have some kind of user interface. It should have some kind of, you should be able to use TCP, you should be able to use UDP, right? So do I say that, hey, these are the learning goals for me for this project, and now you can come up with your own project which satisfies these learning goals, and you can discuss that, right? And any project that you come up with, I can kind of, maybe if it does not satisfy all my learning goals, maybe we'll tweak it slightly here and there so that you do your project rather than my project. Okay. And that, when I talk about this in an Indian setting, the immediate thing is, how are we going to compare 2 projects? How are we going to give grades, right? So the focus is not on learning, but on grades and evaluation. When we talk about project-based learning, we have to kind of forget about grades and evaluation for the time being, right? It's not going to, if some group worked a little bit more than this group and this group got a slightly better grade than that guy, it's okay. That kind of unfairness will always be there in this world. It is there even in a subjective type question or objective type question, right? Even in an objective type question, it can happen that the topic that I just read before the exam, there are 5 questions from that topic, right? So life is unfair. Okay, so let's not worry about fairness. Let's worry about learning. right? And therefore, and I always suspect that the reason why we say similar projects or same project needs to be given to the entire class is not because of our concern for fairness. I think very few of us are concerned about fairness. It is about our own capability to be able to guide different kinds of projects in the class. Okay. And I think, again, it's a matter of investment that you make into the students. How much time are you willing to spend with the students? How much you care about their learning? That's important. Okay. So that's the other difference between the projects there and here. Who decides the project? How much autonomy does the student have? Okay. So we have talked about regular meetings. And in fact, a related thing we have said is our intermediate goals. One. Student. No, so we, as I said, typically the faculty should. No, so the faculty has said what are the learning goals for this course, right? So as I said, when I ask you to, so in my network class, I will say, I want you to build a network application, because the goal of this project is to be able to build an application where multiple people can talk to each other, not just two people talking to each other. The goal is to have some, to learn slightly beyond networking, like user interface. The goal is to be able to use both the transport protocols that we have learned in this, TCP as well as UDP. So come up with an application where there is some communication over UDP and some communication over TCP. So these are the things that I'm going to specify as an instructor, right? That what are the goals? Okay. Now I expect students to come up and say, I want to build a video chat. I'm going to build a PPP, file sharing. I'm going to build something like Google Drive. Or I'm going to build something else, Skype, right? So let that come from the student, okay? And not be forced from the instructor, right? This will make my life a little bit more difficult, because somebody may come up with a project which involves concepts beyond what I've taught, and I have to learn those concepts myself, or be able to at least be aware of those concepts to say, hey, I don't know this, but that guy can help you. Right? And I don't know this is a very difficult thing to say for many faculty members, right? And therefore we sometimes say, this project, whatever we did last time, right? Many times, in fact, I've seen last year's projects are given this year, right? And the students also take the last year's projects and submit it this year, right? So I think we need to be a little bit innovative and give a lot of autonomy to students to learn, okay? Now, somebody talked about time management. This is an important goal. And in fact, we, in this Olin workshop that I attended, they would have a workshop on how they deal with a first year course. Then the next day, there was like, how do I deal with a second year course? And the third day was like, how do I deal with a third year course, and so on, right? And the first day, when we're talking about first semester, I'm going to give example of exactly what they do in first semester and third semester and fifth semester and so on. The typical thing is, you tell a student, this is the kind of project I want. Now go and define it yourself, right? They will come back and say, we are going to do this. We are going to change the world in the first semester. Well, they're really excited guys, they just got admission into this fantastic university that everybody talks about. And they know that this is like a project-based learning. They have to do big things, build things, right? And therefore, in that excitement, they're going to talk about, we are going to just change the world. We are going to do this, right? And the faculty member is typically, okay, we'll see. And these guys are like, are you discouraging me, right? But then at the end of the semester, they realize it was not discouragement, but making them learn, how do you do time management and how do you scope the project. Scoping the project is extremely important, because if you don't scope the project well, what happens typically in many projects that I've seen, at the beginning of the year, we'll say, we want to achieve this. So we have defined a complete set that, let's say we are building some software tool. I want that tool to be built at the end of the year that it can be used, right? If you didn't scope it well, and particularly if you said, I'm going to build a much bigger thing, then at the end of the year, you would have put in more effort than what was needed, and we have an incomplete piece of work, right, which is useless in all respects, right? Now the student is going to come to me and say, hey, I worked much harder than all these other guys, right? All those other guys are getting an A. Why are you giving me a B? And I'm going to say, hey, all that, whatever they've developed is useful. What you have developed is not useful. He says, but I've learned so much, right? So this is a problem that we are going to face at the end of the year or at the end of the semester if we don't scope the project well. Anybody who does 90% of the work is pretty much useless as far as I'm concerned, right? Because for that project to be useful, it should be working on all inputs, it should have a good user interface, it should have a good manual, it should have some description of how to add new features and all those things. In a software project, all that is very important. If you haven't done that, I can't give this piece of software to the next set of people and say, take it forward, do research based on this. And therefore, it's completely useless to me, right? So scoping a project is extremely important, and there the faculty has to help the student without making the student feel that I'm discouraging you from doing exciting work, right? Because if you are very direct about this, this is not going to be possible, right? Then the feeling might be he just wants something small, complete, because he's interested in himself, not in my learning, right? So you have to initially kind of encourage, but say, look, these are the possible constraints, these are the things that we'll have to learn, these are the, this, and so on, etc., right? So slowly train him on scoping the project rather than just discouraging him on the whole issue, okay? So learning scoping is very important, and scope should be consistent with whatever course outcome or project outcome we decided in the beginning. Okay. The next thing that we need to look at in a project is team formation. How do you decide a team in a project? In your course, when you give a project, how do you decide a team? Let the student decide. So that's one possible way of doing things. Students decide. Okay. Anybody else? Any other way of deciding teams? Pardon? Mm-hmm.
We have syllabus, and in that case, the different topics are there. So what we can do, the groups, small groups can be formed with a one group with one topic, another group with another topics. So if someone is interested, then in that case, we can follow those students in that group.
Okay. So if I understand you correctly, what we are really saying is that the projects are going to be in n topics, and you're going to form n teams.
And a student interested for that topic.
And team members interested in topic. Okay, this is another way of forming teams.
A person with different skills, where combined to form a team.
So that the faculty should decide.
They should complement each other.
Okay. So the other way is faculty decides, and it decides with complementary skills. Okay, so I expect a project to need 3 or 4 different skills, and I will put 3 or 4 students who are good at one of those skills at least, right? Any other mechanism? Okay, so the other possibility is faculty decides, but random. Yeah?
Myself is the student decide what project is going to do, and depending upon the content, we have to find or what is.
No, so student is coming up with the idea of the project, and then the faculty is saying, work with these students.
Myself, faculty and student both have to say, and then they decide what we are planning, and depending on what is time required.
So student choose the team, right? I mean, basically, how student decide that's, see, once we say student choose the team, then I don't want to, as a faculty, want to know how you have chosen the team, right? You are saying that most probably the way it will work out is that some student has taken the lead in defining the project. That student kind of knows what skills I want, and therefore that guy is going to approach his friends and say, I want to do this project. Do you want to work with me in my team or not? Right? But whatever it is, I'm saying once the student decides, faculty has no role, and therefore I'm not discussing it any further as to what their motivation is in terms of being in a particular team. No, team is students, right? I mean, I'm talking about a class in which there are projects, and let's say 50 people in the class, 3 to 4 members team, so about, let's say 12, 13, 14 teams are being formed. Yeah?
Sir,
Yes.
core competency is one of the very important factors to decide a team. If suppose the team is working upon multifarious activities consisting of 4 or 5 core competencies trait,
Right.
then in that case students, if they are allowed to make the team, certainly there will be some biasness, there will be some pick and choose, like that type of thing, party politics, everything. But if the involvement of the teacher is there, guide is there, he knows better than the students, and without any biasness, he can recognize the core competencies of the team members, and then he can frame a perfect team.
Okay. So, but basically you are agreeing that in that case that faculty decides and with complementary skills.
Right.
Right?
Another thing is that if suppose there is a team of students, they are driving in an uneven terrain without any direction, without anything, without this and that. And they don't have any other tools, not even a compass, not the direction, and they are driving. Or rather, take a simple example, they are going through the road, and in the road, that directions are given, this much distance, this place. If suppose some notorious student, they turn the boat in another direction, and if there is nobody to guide, then in that case, the student will be misleaded. So certainly at certain point of time, there should be the team leader, the person who should guide them.
Sure. So that's the first thing we said, regular meetings. And we said not just regular meetings once in 3 weeks, but regular meetings 3 times a week, 2 times a
That
week.
is why we are telling GPS, which is guiding us.
Right.
That GPS is not the global positioning system, it is Guru positioning system.
Yes. Good. So, any other method of forming teams? So we have said students decide or faculty decides. If faculty decide, it could be based on complementary skills or it could be random. And of course, there was another way of deciding teams where we are saying there are going to be n topics to be learnt and there are going to be n teams to be formed, and every student we ask which topic they want to learn, and based on that they get into that team. Yes?
Sir, will it be based on the learning outcomes? Because if you decide what are the learning outcomes, a faculty can decide which student, if you decide 4 5 learning outcomes, you can decide which student can be grouped to this learning outcome 1, 2, 3 or 4.
Maybe I want all students to learn everything, right? A learning outcome is meant for all students. All learning outcomes are meant for all students.
All the students cannot be put together in a single project.
No, learning outcomes are independent of projects, sir. The project is a vehicle to learn certain things. So learning outcomes have to be independent of the project. All projects must lead to all learning outcomes. So therefore, we cannot say that, okay, so maybe I should step back a little bit. And when I went to, again, I'm going to keep repeating about Olin. I'm so excited about this visit, right? The first slide that they put up on the first day, right? It had these 15 bullet points, about what is the learning outcome or what is the goal of the entire degree program. 4 years of bachelor's in engineering, what is the goal of this program, right? And they started off by saying, you know, the student should be a professional, student should have ethics, student should have problem solving skills, student should be entrepreneurial. At the time of graduation we're talking about design and, you know, the societal impact, or be kind of worried about the environment and blah blah blah, right? These are the kind of things that if you go on AICT website you will find similar stuff, right? You go on MIT website you will find similar stuff. What was very interesting about that set of 15 things was there was not a single thing that talked about engineering. Okay. And they were absolutely fine with that. I'm giving you a degree in engineering, and the goals of that degree do not say you will learn engineering. So for example, there is a degree called computer science. None of those 15 said you will be able to deal with databases, or you will be able to deal with networks, or you will be able to deal with whatever, you'll understand operating system, or nothing. Okay? And their thing was, hey, I want them to be those 15 things, right? Similarly, when we design a course in which there is a major project, the outcomes are going to be some of these things, right? That you learn group activity, time management, maybe learn discipline, but very vaguely worded that I learned discipline, right? And every project should lead to all of these, right? Whatever subset we have decided for that project, right? These are all possible outcomes. A single course or a single project will have some of these outcomes. Whatever outcomes we have decided as outcomes of that course, they must be met for all students. It's not a choice. Okay, now coming back to these mechanisms, do we see problems in them? Are all of them equally good in all situations? Or we can just pick up anybody in our course and anything that will work?
There are problems. You have to intentionally creating the groups based on the database wise.
Mm-hmm.
And in that case, the students, like they feel that they are comfortable, they are not comfortable with that particular students. And in that case, the project's like speed or the outcomes may be affected.
Okay, so what is being said is if faculty decides, then some members of the team may be like sworn enemies of each other, right? And I really don't want to work with this guy. And if you're forcing me to work with this guy, well, the project's going to suffer, we are going to not work together.
This may not be the case for all the groups.
Right, so for some groups it could be the case, right? So if the faculty, so what that means is if faculty has to decide the groups, it better should take some of that into consideration, and I'm going to talk about how they make teams in Olin. We're taking exactly this kind of stuff into account. Yeah, I'll come back to you, yeah.
But the same having the some advantage, because in future they have to work in some corporate industry, and
Right.
every person not will be their friend. So they have to adopt themselves, or they have to make the practice to work in such type of adversity and will excel in such type of thing. So it is a learning, it is a practice from the initial.
Sure, yes.
Third point, where there are 8 topics and the student can choose from any of the topics, then the number of students opting for difficult topics or slightly more, or in other words, the team may be uneven. In certain topics, more number of students will be there. So that might create a problem.
Okay, so you're saying that different groups may have to do different work. Well, that's where the scoping is important, right? If there is something that involves a lot of work, then maybe either I reduce the scope or maybe I increase the size of the team, right? So the faculty has to be somewhere there, even if it is a student-driven thing, the faculty with its experience will have to somehow kind of guide these things, even if you don't want to interfere in it too much, okay? If students have some freedom, then leadership will be developed, yes. Yeah. Yeah, 1 second, yes.
In my opinion,
on the quality of the school.
I mean, the whole idea of student-driven groups was that students have come up with a project idea and they know who can do it best. So making project by faculty and group by student would probably defeat that purpose.
Group will be formed by the students.
Yeah.
And whatever the part of which part of the project will be done by those students, that will be decided by the faculty.
Okay, that's one possibility. Yes, you were saying something?
I was saying that only the students are given the ability to on the team. Then they sometimes it may cause unbalanced team.
Right.
So there should be understanding between teacher and the students.
Right, so there can be unbalanced team, all the good students may form a team together, all the weak students may form a team together, and all that will happen. Again, the faculty members should make sure that then the workload scoping, okay, I mean in that 1 week I heard this word hundreds of times, that many of the problems that you find in the group formation and so on is because of scoping. That they can be handled if the scope is done properly. So if you see that it is student-driven project and you know that these are weak students, the expectations should be less, right? And in fact, I will draw a graph here. The way projects should be handled is, if I look at skills here and expectations on this side, so the project should lie in this part. Right? If the project lies here, then this leads to boredom. You have a lot of skills, but very little expectations. And if the project lies here, then it leads to frustration. So this part will happen only if you scope the project correctly. And the learning will happen if it is neither frustration nor boredom. Okay. All right, so coming back to this, there are clearly problems in each of them. None of them is a solution for all kinds of projects. When students decide the projects, clearly they are more motivated and they formed a team which works together and so on. However, as somebody said, a random team formation is probably a good idea to make them learn about what they're going to face in real life. By the way, in real life, if there is one guy in your office whom you really, really don't want to work with, typically your boss will take care of that. So it's not that, I mean, if you keep saying, I don't want to work with him, I don't want to work with him, I don't want to work with him, then your boss is going to say, well, you get out, right? But if you say, I'm willing to work with all these people but him, I think the boss will take care. So in a real life situation, you are able to say that there is one guy I don't want to work with, right? The issue of complementary skills, right? This is a double-edged sword. It is one thing to say that, I should work in my core areas of strength, but then I'm only building on those strengths. Remember, the goal is that at the end of 4 years, all students have all strengths. There will be some students who are focused on one more than the others, but if I'm good at programming and you are good at hardware, and every project you do the hardware and I do the software, I'll never learn hardware and you will never learn software, right? So this sort of stuff that, we should only focus on core strengths. So in some projects where the goal is to build a fantastic technology, core strengths make sense. But if the goal is to learn the discipline, and that's where, ensuring what goals are the goals of this particular project, you have to take a subset of these, that becomes important, right? So in some projects, complementary skills is great. In some project, complementary skills is great only to be able to say, software, you're not going to do software, right? So you have complementary skills, but you're going to work on the skills that you don't have, okay? Okay, so now we are going to talk about a few examples of the kind of projects that they will ask their students to do. And one major difference between the kind of project-based learning they have and the project-based learning we have is, in our case, project is part of a course, right? We have a 40-lecture course. It has its tests and quizzes and assignments and so on. And then we are saying, hey, add a project to it. Except probably the BTech project that is a standalone project, which is the final year stuff and so on. Most of the other stuff is, the project is part of a course. I'm teaching a networks course, regular 40 lectures, and I also say, hey, at the end of the semester, you should have done this, right? Their idea is that there should be several courses where, well, the project is the only way to learn. There are no lectures. And this is not to apply something that you have learned in another course. No. This is to learn that course. Okay. So for example, I think in second semester, they have this course where they will say, why don't you build a boat? Okay. Now building a boat means you will be given a specification that this boat should be able to carry 5 passengers with 500 kgs of luggage, and therefore you know the size, etc. Now it's up to you to learn, how do you make it more, whatever is the equivalent of aerodynamic on this thing, right? So you learn fluid mechanics. There is no lecture on fluid mechanics in the whole curriculum, right? You learn to be able to implement, to be able to solve those equations that fluid dynamics will tell you. You need to learn calculus. So there is no lecture on calculus throughout, right? How do you solve partial differential equations? You learn yourself. There may be like a 15-minute lecture on some of these topics, or half an hour lecture. No 40-lecture course, right? You learn about materials, because what materials to use to build that boat. You learn about workshop. And at the end of the semester, a boat should be there, right? So, and when the Rick Miller came here, he proudly said, my mechanical engineering students do not do a course in thermodynamics, and we are probably the only university which do not have a course on thermodynamics as compulsory course for mechanical engineering students, right? And at the end of 4 years, those guys know as much thermodynamics as anybody else. Yes.
But if I were to put it in words, what would be the learning objective in that sense? What is it that I understand I want to do?
Yeah. So the learning objectives of that course are indeed that you will be able to, learn principles of fluid dynamics and apply them in building real stuff, right? So the learning outcomes indeed say that you will know these equations, or they may not say it explicitly, but you must know those equations, you must know how to solve those equations, otherwise you can't do this. So learning outcomes include the application of those. So if you don't understand all complexities of that equation, it's okay, because application of that is important.
In some sense, it's like I was looking at another course at Stanford. They asked you to build a bicycle, which you build it yourself in the whole course and ride it up to a port town nearby 100 miles per hour or that. And so it could be other things, it could be a boat or a cycle or whatever.
Yeah.
And the learning objective would be to.
So learning outcomes will also include design, they will also include entrepreneurship, they will also include teamwork, they will also include, there are a lot of non-science, non-engineering learning outcomes which are extremely important.
Project management,
Yeah.
indirect.
Right. But the point that I'm making is that they have courses where the assumption is without any lecture, you will also learn the discipline material. A lot of self-learning, right?
So that is why even in a formal course also, a small component of that will be projects.
Yeah, but here we are talking about 100% project, no lecture. And yet the claim is, in fact, I didn't believe this claim. Okay, so I told them I want to meet your students, right? So in the summer there were only a few students, I met them, and one of the girls said, I spent my previous semester at MIT, which is just a few miles away, right? So I said, hey, if you spent a semester at MIT, you must have failed courses there, because you don't do any basics here, and MIT is all about basics, like as poles apart as can be. So how would you survive in MIT? And she said, I got 4.0, which means all A's in MIT, right? She says, we learn how to learn. And therefore, any topic, first of all, we do learn basics. It's just self-learning, not a lecture-driven thing. And more importantly, we learn how to learn. Any topic you tell me, I'll learn. As good as a 40-lecture course.
But syllabus should be framed as such.
Huh?
There should be syllabus.
So, I mean, I'm not saying that we can replicate Olin here, but I think we should at least think in terms of how to make our projects more interesting and make learning better through our projects, right? All right. Yeah, so I was talking about what all they do in like first year, second year, third year kind of stuff. The very first semester, the student has just joined. Today is the first day of classes. What do they do on first day of classes, right? So there is this forest area just next door to the campus. You can walk there. So they actually take all their class of 80, 85 students to this forest, and they will say, hey, just spend a couple of hours here and watch nature and see what nature is doing and replicate some aspect of nature. Okay. What does it mean? Well, some students will then say, I'm seeing this bird fly, and I want to make a machine that will fly, right? Or I see this fish in the water, and I'm going to make something that can float on the water. Right? Or I see this grasshopper hopping, and I'm going to make something that hops, right? You do something like that, right? And there, in this very first semester course, unlike the second semester where give the boat example, where you're supposed to learn fluid dynamics, Python, calculus, and many other things, and materials, here they are expecting that you will do some very simple design with cardboard boxes and with, or simple things that you can find in your home or stuff. I mean, if it doesn't really have to be, something very complex, right? And in fact, they said, we were like 70 of us from 18 different universities from 11 different countries, right? They said, why don't you do it, right? So in the first workshop we had was, we had to make a hopper, right? And we are given all these cardboard boxes. We are given this, tapes and springs and rubber bands and stuff like that. All this stuff is on the table. And what is interesting is that, if you just ask me to make a hopper, I can, and they said, you have 15 minutes to think and make it, right? And each one of us could make it. Very simple design, of course, very trivial design. But for example, I could just take a small cardboard and put a spring to it and say, this is a hopper. If I press this, it just hops. That's it. I can do it in 5 minutes. And I didn't think, when they were explaining this, I was like, oh, man, where have I come? I haven't built anything from my hands for like 30 years. Okay, and now they're asking me to do this. This is completely wrong place to be, right? But it was so enjoyable. And then they will say, okay, you built something very trivial in 15 minutes. Now, 2 of you join hands. I give you another 20, 25 minutes and make it better. So both of us will study our designs and say, okay, this is what seems to be better. We'll make a slightly bigger and so on. And then they will say, okay, now that 2 of you, and the table has 4 people, 2 on this side and 2 on this side. Now these 2 teams of 2 people each, now build another one. Now you have half an hour, make more complicated, do whatever. And they were essentially teaching us, how do we scope our project? How do we decide things in a team? What design is better than the other? How do we evaluate, criticize others, and so on, right? These are extremely important aspects of the project. Right? The final thing that we are building is not very important. This is a first semester course at the end, right? So, as I said, the goals of the project are going to be different in different courses. Okay? Yet another course, which is, I think, a second year course, there's a design course. Okay. Now, the very first lecture they are told, you will have to design some technology for somebody. Right? But it's only on paper. You're not really going to build that technology. Okay? So first decide what's your target group, right? And students will spend a whole lot of time in talking to each other and saying, hey, my target group is old people who can't walk, or my target group is, people living in poverty conditions who can't afford this expensive stuff. Or my target group is whatever else, right? Then they will actually go out to the community and talk to the target group, right? And say, what is it that you feel every day is a problem that we could solve using technology, right? And this will go on. And I said, the faculty member is going to talk to each team every other day. That's the important thing, so that you know exactly that there is progress being made and where they're stuck and how we can help them and support them and so on, right? Now, once they have talked to the target group, they want to build technology, right? Now, here comes the faculty and says, hey, in this course, you are not building technology, right? Why? Because design is an equally important component of any development work, right? If I let you build technology in this course, after you have looked at the problem, you have talked to all the target group, then you're not going to focus enough on design. So I want to create this technology only on paper. Okay. So you're going to say my technology is going to do this is going to be the user interface, this is going to be the tools that I'm going to use, this is the kind of material I'm going to use. You really don't know whether it's going to happen or not. Okay. So essentially, they're focusing, the goal of this is what is the design process, right? And therefore, you're not really bothered about whether they're learning anything about the discipline or not. That's not the goal. Again, we look at all these goals. There are only some goals are relevant in this case. All right? So at the end of the semester, the only thing that is expected is that for this particular problem, we can possibly develop this technology. These are the kind of hardware, this is the kind of solution, this is the user interface, this is how it will work. And when they have designed before the end of the semester, they actually go back to the same community and say, this is how we have designed, this is what the user interface will look like, do you think you will use it? So again, get feedback from them and again improve upon their design, right? No technology built, right? Now, to give an example of how projects could be useful in a very different setting altogether, a history course, right? So again, there's a workshop, 3 hours, we are put into these groups of 4 people each, and the course started, and they're saying, this is how the course started. We are simulating here the first lecture of the course, right? What is this first lecture? Lecture is the wrong way to describe it because there is no lecture, right? So in the middle of the room, there is a table, and there are all sorts of consumer goods lying on this table. And they say, every group here, come up forward and take one consumer good with you. So my group, we had one person from Ghana and one person from Mexico and one person from somewhere else. And we went there and we said, okay, the bottled water looks very interesting. So we picked up this bottled water and brought it to our table, right? And then they said, think about this product and say, what can you learn about history from this product? Raise certain questions about history. And it was like, hey, that's crazy. I mean, I look at this bottled water and I say, I want to learn history. Hey, please tell me something about history. And we think about it, and they said, look, we are not going to teach you, right? After a while, one of the 4 people said, what is the purpose of this? The purpose of this, whatever it is, was that purpose or was that need there 100 years ago? Was that need there 1,000 years ago? Was that need there 5,000 years ago? And if yes, how did they satisfy their needs when they did not have bottled water? Because this is only 20-year-old. So now you see, we are ourselves thinking about history. The faculty member is not teaching us history, right? So then we said, the purpose of this bottled water? It's nothing but transportation of water from place A to place B. That's the purpose of this bottled water, right? From my home to the place I'm going to, because I do not expect the clean water to be available everywhere. So this is a transportation mechanism. Was this need there 100 years ago? Of course it was there. Was this need 1,000 years ago? Of course it was there, right? How did they satisfy the need? And then we said, well, transportation of water happens in 2 ways. Or, one could be at the macro scale. There is a river far away, and we want to service this city which is like 10 kilometers away. How are you going to transport water from that river to the city? That's like millions of gallons. And the other is on a micro scale, I'm traveling from place A to place B and I want to carry water, or my family is traveling from place A to B and I'm carrying some water, right? And then we ourselves said, there must be some ways of carrying river water from place A to place B 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, because not all cities developed next to the river. And even when cities developed next to the river, not all houses were next to the river. Cities were indeed a couple of kilometers wide. Okay? And the rivers were actually in the rainy season could become 2 kilometers wide. Therefore, you had to leave all this river bed and then start building the city. So on a normal day, without the monsoons, the farthest house could indeed be 3-4 kilometers away from the river, right? So how did this water transportation take place? And then we do Googling and we say, hey, Roman Empire had these aqueducts. And then we have more questions. Was Roman Empire a very strong empire because they had aqueducts and other empires did not have aqueducts? Did it give them a strategic advantage? These are all things that we are coming up with, no faculty involvement here, right? Now when we raise these questions, the faculty will come up and say, hey, you know what? You want to learn more about Roman Empire? Here is a good book, here is a good course, here is a stuff, you can learn from this, right? Similarly, when we talk about micro transportation of water, we said 1,000 years ago, or why 1,000 years ago, even 100 years ago, we had this animal skin based things. In fact, I have seen it in my childhood for sprinkling water, right? Or things made up of earthen, we have used surais and pots and so on, which have been used for thousands of years, right? We had copper vessels, bronze vessels, and then we say, since when did we start using copper vessels? When did the Bronze Age started? Again, we are raising all these questions, and the faculty member is only saying, you want to learn about Bronze Age? Here are the good materials, right? So our project was to learn about water through the history. And as the semester progresses, so the project is not about building things only. The project could be learning something in a group. So at the end of the semester, we should be an expert on water transportation in historical times, and through that should have learned different kinds of histories. Now I'm going to come back to this term autonomy, and I think that's an extremely important term that I learned there. So we so far have said autonomy in terms of what student can do as a project. This is the context in which we had used. Now we are going to say, does it also mean student can decide what to learn in a course? Can we leave it to the student to decide the curriculum of a course? No, will student decide that in a computer networks course, whether he wants to study TCP/IP or not?
Participation of the student in particular committee, syllabus.
No, I'm not saying that. See, syllabus, there is somebody who has decided that there is a computer networks course, right? There is a title is given to you, right? When you are designing a course, can you say at the time of design that I'm not going to give a detailed syllabus and let the student decide what he wants to learn in that course? In as important a course as computer networks or history. So if I have a course on history, right? So we say, look, we are going to offer an elective. We do have courses on humanities and social science as part of engineering education, and there is a course on history. Do I not say he's going to learn Indian history, Roman history, Mayan history, etc., or do I just leave it to the student to learn whatever he wants to learn? Okay. So can the curriculum of a course be decided by the student in the sense that when the course is being offered, not at the course being designed? Okay. Can the student decide how the grading will take place? Can the student decide what the schedule of lectures is going to be, or whatever interaction is going to be? Okay? And somebody like me sitting there, no, this is not possible. Right? How can student decide all this? What am I for? Right? All things cannot be given in their hands. Exactly. Right? However, we just had an example of a history course where everybody in the class is going to learn different histories. Was there a problem in that course? Well, whether there was a problem in the course or not will be dependent on what were the course outcomes and whether we met those course outcomes or not. Okay? The fact that different people have learned different things is not a problem if that all of them met the course outcomes. Right? Now, when I teach history, what is the course outcome? The course outcome is not that I learn Roman history. For an engineer, that cannot be the course outcome. For an engineer, the course outcome has to be, I'm going to learn critical thinking. I learn history because it helps me in learning critical thinking. And did I learn critical thinking by learning Roman Empire? Of course I did. Somebody else who said, I'm going to study Indus Valley Civilization, did he learn critical thinking? Yes, he did. Right? So why is it a problem that you learn Indus Valley Civilization and I learn Roman history? So the curriculum, potentially, it cannot work in all courses. Okay? But curriculum can be decided by the student in some cases. Similarly, grading. I mean, if there are two completely different ways of grading. I mean, one kind of project could be based on an exam. I'm going to see whether you did something or learned something or not. In some times I may say, hey, I'm going to ask you to give a presentation and I'm going to decide whether you've learned something or not. Again, the exams or whatever way of evaluation is to really see whether you achieved those course outcomes or not. And in different kinds of situations, different kinds of evaluation mechanism will tell me whether you achieved those course outcomes or not. Again, this cannot be done in every course. I understand that. But just to think about it, that a student can decide some of these things, I think opens up the possibilities in at least some ways. At least we start thinking of this, right? Maybe it cannot be done in most of the courses. Okay. However, the fact that it can be done even in one course in 4 years means that we need to think about our curriculum, our grading, our pedagogy, the whole way in which a university works. Okay. Similarly, schedule, right? I mean, if there is a lecture, then yes, that's the lecture, right? But if it is really what we know as the flipped classroom model, in which case, I'm really saying here is a material that you learn on your own, and I'm available at this slot and this slot. I can define 2 or 3 different slots. 1/3 of the class can come on this slot. You can choose which slot they come in, right? So even the schedule within certain constraints can be very flexible, and student can decide, and in fact, I don't remember now all kinds of autonomies, but there were like 10 things in the autonomy they said are possible. In a course, only one of those may be possible, but we should at least think about how much autonomy can we give to the student. And why giving autonomy to the student is useful? Because of the last topic that we are going to look at today. Intrinsic motivation. How do we make sure that students are motivated to do this project or whatever else learning that we are trying to impart? Okay. Now, let me tell you briefly what overall feeling I got after 5 days in Olin. Okay, the overall feeling was that they are good not because of pedagogy, not because of project-based learning, not because of anything else, but because they cared for their students. I think that's really the bottom line that differentiated Olin from some of us. You know, in my department, in my institute, so many times I've heard students are bad. They are, only after the grades. They are not motivated. They want to spend all the time on cultural activities. Okay? The day you stop saying that and say, if there is anything wrong with the student, I take responsibility for it, many of these problems will get resolved. That's where Olin comes in. Right? This was our admission process. If they have come here, it's my fault. It's as simple as that. Right? If your admission process is faulty, fix that. Don't blame the students. Okay. So, motivation. Again, a lot of times we say our students are not motivated. Can there be a human being who is not motivated? Okay. Can we say that this gentleman here is not motivated? And I've heard this statement so many times, and I said, of course we can say that. There are some people who are not motivated. Right? So this guy will then say, hey, this guy must be motivated. After all, he has given your entrance exam. He has applied. There was at least a time when he was motivated. If if in our context, if somebody has given joint entrance exam and successfully cleared that to come into a good college, then he was motivated at some point in time. So therefore, to label him as demotivated is completely wrong. What you can say is that in this particular situation, he is not motivated. You cannot say that this is the characteristic of the person. Motivation is a characteristic of a situation and not a person. Okay. Now, so for example, the same student may be doing very well in one course and not doing very well in the other course. Now, if he is demotivated, why is he doing well in one course? So again, it's because the situation in this other course is such that he feels demotivated. And I'm not trying to blame the faculty here. I'm myself a faculty here, right? It's just that maybe his learning style and your teaching style don't match. Okay?
Interest is also a factor for the
Pardon?
interest.
Interest. Yeah.
Somebody has interest in something.
Yeah, but see, the point is whether interest is the reason or whatever, do we try to find it out? Okay? How many of us will go beyond saying my students are demotivated, they are bad, they are not doing anything, they are only motivated by grades or they are only motivated by marks or whatever, right? How many people will go beyond that and say, well, how do I improve this, right? So, in Olin, of course, they have their own research and everything, but all the faculty members seem to be very interested in doing research related to pedagogy and student interaction and education and so on, to some level or the other. I mean, they're all interested in at least learning about these things, right? So one of these guys, they looked at their course, and then, so there is one standard questionnaire which you can give to the students, and there is the way to figure out whether they're motivated in a particular situation today, right now, at this instant, are they motivated or not, right? So they did that for the whole semester. Every week, they will measure the motivation levels of every student in the class. And then at the end of the semester, they kind of plotted all kinds of graphs, and they saw that motivation level on an average was plunging very drastically at the end of 5th week. Right? Now, what do we do? First of all, they didn't leave it at that. My course is over, I don't have to worry about it, fine, I have very interesting this thing. After all, the motivation levels came back up again at the end of the semester, they were fairly motivated. So if for some period they were demotivated, so be it, right? They said no. Even if I want to say I'm going to do nothing, I must understand why this motivation level came down at that time. Okay? So they did interview all the students, or many of the students. They looked at their own schedule and so on and so forth, and they figured out that, and again, this is primarily a project-based course. In fact, this was the history course that I talked about, right? And they said, the first paper that was due was at the end of 5th semester, or 5th week, right? And so the 5th week, everybody is like stressed out. At the end of the week, I have to submit this paper, okay? And really, these doubts start coming in. Why am I doing this? Is this useful? And all those doubts reduce the motivation level, right? Can I redesign the course so that I will maintain the same learning outcomes, but will also maintain motivation level throughout the semester? And it turns out it's not that difficult, right? So of course, at this stage, there are multiple ways to look at this data and whatever you have learned. One way to say is what we just said 5 minutes ago, saying, hey, handling stress is part of learning outcome. And if he's stressed out and therefore demotivated at the end of 5 weeks, that's good. He's learning how to handle the stress, right? The other way to say is, if the way to learn time management or stress management is by demotivating oneself, by hating this course for at least briefly, and all that, that's probably not good. If I can keep the course enjoyable throughout the semester, that's very good. So after some discussion, they decided that they're going to try making the course enjoyable throughout the semester. And how do you do it? And very trivial interventions can handle this. So I said, instead of saying one paper at the end of 5 weeks, I'm going to say at the end of 1 week, submit me an outline. At the end of 2nd week, submit me what all articles you are going to read to prepare this paper. At the end of 3rd week, show me some material in each of those sections. And at the end of 4th week, something better. At the end of 5th week, you submit it, right? So there is no one time when you are stressed out, you have not even started working, and you don't know what to do within this period. You have other courses to handle and all that. And suddenly next time they did this course with these changes, the motivation level was high throughout the semester, right? So I think we should also, again, why did this happen? Because I care about my students, right? So I think what research they are doing and what processes they are using and so on is less important to me, but the final learning is, if you care about your students, they will learn better. Thank you very much.